frankly, our churches and our Christian leaders don't equip us well. And we've just been raised in the anti-intellectual Christianity that just kind of sets those questions aside. This is a really good question, though. And so we want to welcome them. And then we want to say, okay, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question, but I think it's a really good question. Let's do some homework together. So that's got to be the first response. Welcome in your kids' questions, whether you can answer them or not. For this podcast episode, we just want to thank Brian Jenkins from Pennsylvania for your support.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. It's donors like you that make the podcast possible.
Larry Sanger is a name that you may not be familiar with, but you are familiar with his work because Larry Sanger is the co-founder of Wikipedia. And I know everybody out there knows Wikipedia because at some point you have used Wikipedia to find unreliable information. No, it's actually a good kind of crowdsourcing platform where gives you some really good information. Not always accurate, but Larry Sanger, smart guy, involved with a lot of things online, kind of these knowledge platforms, but he's one of the co-founders. So now Larry Sanger just recently came out and he came out with his testimony and he titled it How a Skeptical Philosopher Becomes a Christian. And so we wanted to kind of read some of the excerpts and hear what he has to say, because I think there is some very good things here to kind of, well, one thing in particular that we as parents have got to pay attention to. So this is, I'll give a little bit of the background, Erin, then you get us into the specifics of the first part of his testimony. Because, and I say first part of his testimony because I accidentally printed out the entire transcript of the testimony.
50 pages.
It's like 50 pages. And you can listen to the entire thing online. It's pretty fascinating. Mm-hmm. He's a very careful or thoughtful guy. And so we'll go ahead and link that in the show notes. But this is what he writes at the beginning. He says, "It's finally time for me to confess and explain fully and publicly that I am a Christian. Followers of this blog have probably guessed this, but it is past time to share my testimony." And then he goes on to say this: "If you did not know this change, and if you knew me before 2020, this might be a surprise. Throughout my adult life, I have been a devotee of rationality, methodological skepticism, and a somewhat hard-nosed and no-nonsense, but always open-minded rigor. I have a PhD in philosophy, my training being in analytic philosophy, a field dominated by atheists and agnostics. Once I slummed about the fringes of the Ayn Rand community, which is also heavily atheist. So old friends and colleagues who lost touch might be surprised by his recent conversion." He says, "For one thing, though I spent over 35 years as a non-believer, I will not try to portray myself a converted, quote unquote, enemy of the faith. I never was. I was merely a skeptic." And so that's what he starts out with. He was a skeptic of Christianity and an intelligent skeptic of Christianity. He's got his PhD in philosophy, and he just recently publicly shared he's come to faith. Now, we're not actually going to focus on him coming to faith. We want to focus a little bit on him coming to his skepticism and agnosticism because he was raised in a Christian home.
Yeah, what caught our attention is that he grew up in a Christian home and wandered away from the church, as they say. And so, of course, that caught your and my attention because so much of the heart of MAVEN is young people, and especially young people in junior high school, college, when this time of life, they're starting to search for answers to things. So the part of his testimony, he starts from the beginning, but But here's a quote that kind of captures his childhood and growing up in the church that caught our attention. This is what Larry Sanger says. He says, throughout my later childhood in Anchorage, Alaska, I was much given to asking, quote, too many questions. For example, I heard as a child much talk about, quote, mind, spirit, soul. And I asked my parents on the way to church when I was perhaps 8 to explain the difference between these and whether they were not perhaps the same. I repeatedly debated with friends about the origin of the universe and discussed the question, if we say we need God to explain where everything came from, then why don't we need something to explain the existence of God? I was confirmed at age 12 in the Lutheran Church, but soon after, my family stopped going to church.
Okay, so Larry sounds like many of our kids, just an inquisitive kid, asking some of these questions. Now, some of us might be listening going, oh my gosh, I dread the day when my kids will ask me those kind of questions.
Well,
right?
I thought for an 8-year-old to even think about the distinctions between mind, spirit, and soul, I thought, wow, that his parents probably recognized early on he was thinking more deeply than probably a lot of. Now, I definitely think children are much smarter than we oftentimes think they are. But this is a sharp kid who's making distinctions of those and then wanting to debate the origin of the universe and these sorts of things. He obviously was a early bloomer that way.
An intellectual kid. And here's the problem. Modern American Christianity, or modern Christianity in the West, because it is so anti-intellectual, and that, now I'm not talking biblically like we're supposed to be anti-intellectual. This is just descriptively. We are so anti-intellectual. So a kid like this who grows up in the church, we often will lose them. We'll lose them because they have these kind of questions. And why do they have these questions? Not just because they're trying to be a pain in the butt. No, they are little image bearers. They're made in God's image. And part of what that means is that they have a rational mind. They are by nature rational. So when we think about our kids, we look at our kids, we need to be thinking, they're little rational creatures. They're little thinkers.
It's hard to think that about a 3-year-old, let's be honest.
It's hard to think about.
That's a little rational guy.
It's hard to think that about our teenagers, especially. Even our 22 and 24-year-olds. No. But by nature, they're rational.
We want to make sense of the world around us.
Exactly. That's what we do.
Kids are the same way.
We are evidence gatherers by nature. We're trying to make sense of the world. So if we have a proper view of our children, then it will elevate their questions. We'll be glad for this kind of thing. And this is one thing that, I mean, you don't get the sense here from his family. He doesn't say here particularly whether or not his family could answer the questions or whether they even welcomed them. You can infer that they didn't because he ends up losing his faith.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing we want to say to parents is, hey, when your kids ask you these questions, whether they're 8 or 18, they ask you difficult questions, the first thing to do is affirm them. And just say, that is a really good question. I am so glad you're thinking hard about your faith. I'm so glad you're asking questions like this. And then the next thing that might need to come out of your mouth is something that is just humble. You know, it's out of humility. And that is, I don't know the answer to that question. Because I'm just thinking about his specific question. Okay, how many Christian adults have a view about whether or not the mind, the spirit, and the soul are the same thing, or are they distinct? I'm guessing most Christians wouldn't even be able to kind of parse that out. And that now, in one sense, we want to say, gosh, that's a bummer, because this question goes to what we are as human beings. Mm. But frankly, our churches and our Christian leaders don't equip us well. And we've just been raised in the anti-intellectual Christianity that just kind of sets those questions aside. This is a really good question, though. And so we want to welcome them. And then we want to say, okay, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question, but I think it's a really good question. Let's do some homework together. So that's got to be the first response. Welcome in your kids' questions, whether you can answer them or not.
Mm. Well, I'm thinking about an 8-year-old asking this question. I would probably say, wow, that is a really good question. What's making you think about that or whatever? And it sounds like as he goes on, his parents started to get into New Age religion. And so his parents clearly didn't have the answer. He talks about that, like them not having a good answer to some of his questions when he was younger.
It sounds like he says he was born into a Lutheran church, Missouri Synod Lutheran, which
a more
is
conservative,
a conservative branch.
Branch of the Lutherans.
Plug and play. Sometimes in the midst of busy lives, we need resources that are going to equip us with biblical truth that are also plug and play, meaning we plug it in, we hit play, and then we learn. Not every resource has to require a bunch of study, a bunch of preparation, and that is how we have designed MAVEN's online video courses. You can plug and play. You can purchase the course and watch the videos and use the workbook that we've designed to learn how the Christian worldview applies to every single area of life. These courses are perfect for individual learning. They're perfect for a classroom. If you're at a Christian school, they're great for a Sunday school or a small group or a homeschool co-op. And they are designed for adults and students to really learn what the Christian worldview says about every area of life. And then how do we navigate the culture that we live in? How do we be salt and light? There are 7 different online video courses that MAVEN offers. Go to equip.maventruth.com to find out more information.
But he goes on, he goes on to say, and I think this is an important part of what you're talking about too. But he goes on to say this. He says, at some point in my late teens, I remember calling up a pastor, I forget which one, to ask skeptical questions. It felt bold for a teenager to do, but I was not merely being rebellious. I needed help thinking through these things. But the pastor had no clear or strong answers. He seemed to be brushing me off and even to treat me with contempt. It seemed to me he did not care. And if anything, I had the impression that he felt threatened by me. This was a surprise. The damage was quickly done, being met with hostile unconcern by a person I expected to be, pastoral, confirmed me in my disbelief.
So, okay, there's a number of things there to unpack. Number one, he goes to a church leader, and like we said earlier, might mean his parents weren't equipped. And so I think there's another thing to take away from this is that I certainly want my kids to be able to go to their pastors. But as mom and dad, we want our kids first to come to us. And we want them to think in their minds, okay, even if mom and dad don't know the answer to this question, they'll know what to do. They'll help me walk through this. I want my kids' first impulse to be, no, let's go to mom and dad. Mm. Now, part of that can be through our own attitude towards questions and really welcoming them. But also another thing that helps our kids have confidence in coming to us is just that we're knowledgeable. Mm-hmm. And that does not mean you have to be a scholar, but just that you know your faith. You care deeply about your faith to know what you believe and why you believe it on some level, that your kids see that. And then they think, okay, mom and dad generally know what they're talking about. And so they're a good source to go to. They're my first source. Larry Sanger didn't have that. So he goes to the next source that we would say Christians should go to, right? The local church. Go to a pastor. And he goes to a pastor, and think about how he describes it. He's got skeptical questions, and that's bold for a teenager. And I want to affirm kids in that. Kids that come with questions, and they may be bold questions, we want to say, that's great. We want our kids asking questions because this is part of a thoughtful life. This is part of a rational Christianity, an intellectual Christianity we want to foster in our kids. And so he says, I really needed help. He needed help. And that's where a lot of our kids are at. They need help. Even if they ask it with some attitude, even if they ask it a little brazenly, to try and look past some of that, which is probably just their insecurity. But to look past that and to say, yeah, I'm going to help you. Yeah, even if I don't have the right answer at the moment, or I don't have the answer right at the moment, I'm going to do some searching with you. But he says the pastor had no clear or strong answers. I mean, pause on that. That's to me is sad. It's a little tragic. Our local pastors should be about the knowledge of God. And again, doesn't mean they have to be able to answer every question on the spot, but it sounds like with what according to Larry Sanger, not only were there no answers forthcoming, the questions weren't even welcomed. But here you have a pastor who's ill-equipped to answer a teenager's questions.
Well, I was thinking about how, a couple things. I was thinking, wouldn't it have been great if his parents went with him to meet with the pastor? Thinking about what you said, it's not like we have to know every answer to every question, but at least if we can help our kids know where to go to get some good answers. And so, of course, you hopefully would go to your pastor. And I think about the pastor, too. I mean, Larry says he didn't give clear or strong answers, which made me think maybe the pastor didn't know exactly how to answer the question and tried to kind of play it off.
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah. And maybe he probably didn't realize if he was asking those questions at 8, by the time he was a teenager, he's asking deep questions. I'm sure they were really thoughtful questions for a thinker like this. And so just to say, even the pastor, it's okay to say, I do not know. I've never had a teen ask me these questions before. I'm really glad you did, but I've never thought about these questions. But what I do know is you're not the first person who's ever asked these questions. And I think that's one thing that with young people is reassuring to them and also helps them to realize these aren't the first thoughts in the universe like this. So in some way, it's like humble yourself, teen, in asking the question. You're not thinking of something no one's ever thought of before, but join the tradition of good Christian thinking and let me expose you to the good thinking of the ages on this topic. Yeah. And it's fine to say, oh, I have never thought about, I'm assuming they're more philosophical questions the kid was asking, whatever they are. But just being humble, because he could tell the pastor didn't really have good answers for the skeptical questions that he was asking.
Yeah. And this is where I don't want to beat up on pastors.
No.
But we certainly want to challenge pastors out there who are listening, is that pastors, youth workers, Christian school teachers, mom and dad, aunt and uncle, grandma, grandpa, all of us should have some basic apologetic training. I mean, apologetics is simply a defense of the faith. It's being able to give a reason for the hope that we have in Jesus. And there are reasons out there. And we are rational creatures who want those reasons. And there are good reasons out there. This is why it's a tragedy that many people grow up in the church without any apologetic training.
Yeah.
Without ever being exposed to all of the great apologetic resources out there. You don't have to be an apologist. There are plenty of good ones out there who will equip you with the basic knowledge. And so even knowing who some of those smart people are out there is helpful so that you can point to those people. You can watch or listen to those people with your students. And I mean, listen to what Larry Sanger said about the pastor. He seemed to be brushing me off and even to treat me with contempt. For what? For asking questions. That is the absolute worst response that we can give to any of our kids whenever they ask questions. To brush them off, to treat them with contempt.
Yeah.
Worst response ever. It's always welcome the questions because, I mean, just think about it. What's the other option? Because the kids won't stop asking questions. Those questions will persist and they will bother the kid. And especially if they're just trying to make sense of their faith. So they're not going to stop asking questions. They're not going to ask you those questions anymore. And that seems to me to be the worst possible option.
Well, that's what ends up happening, right? I mean, he says, so the damage was done, and the pastor, kind of ushered him in. He was already heading that way. He had skeptical questions and he didn't have answers for them, but this kind of ushered him into his disbelief. And I just thought...
I mean...
What?
The way he puts it, I'm just reading it again. He was met with hostile unconcern by a person I expected to be... Who I expected to be pastoral. That's what, quote, confirmed me in my disbelief. I mean, that's heavy. And that's one thing we say in the surf world. That's heavy. Like a big scary wave is heavy. This is that statement is heavy.
Yeah.
Because imagine that you or I or the pastor or the youth leader or whatever is the one who confirms a kid in their disbelief. This is why we say this is a tragic story up front.
Yeah. Well, I think the pastor getting angry, is that what the word he used there? Frustrated.
Brushing me off. I had the impression that he felt threatened by me.
Yeah. I think
hostile unconcern.
I think when we get angry with people asking questions, it probably is a sign the pastor didn't have the answers. We'll get defensive because we don't have the answers. And this is where our anger, instead of being humble, our anger can push people away. And again, not that his whole thing, rests on this pastor's shoulders. It's not like it's all his fault, but you think about how a different response would have fostered in at least a humility that probably would have drawn Larry into, at least the pastor cares enough to say, hey, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Which I'm just thinking, this is why every home and every pastor's office should have books on apologetics, should at minimum have some C.S. Lewis books, Mere Christianity, Josh McDowell books, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, like some of these really just core.
You're going old school.
Well, yeah, Francis Schaeffer, Greg Kokel, just some basic apologetics books that they can say, even if they haven't read them cover to cover, but they know maybe some of the topics that they cover. Mm-hmm. That when a youth comes in, when someone comes in with questions, you can say, "Oh, I have a book. I have several books right here that probably address these questions."
Yeah, and there are like contemporary apologists who are dealing with the contemporary issues. Mm-hmm. That issues that kids are asking today. So, like, I think of a Paul Copan who we've had on the Maven Parent podcast, where he's dealing with the Old Testament ethics questions. Like, is the God of the Old Testament good? And what about the slavery in the Old Testament? What about the misogyny? And so having his stuff. So there's contemporary folks who are answering some of the most pressing challenges today as well. So absolutely right, Erin. You should own some of these books and have them in. And if you want to know where to start, just go back through old episodes of the Maven Parent podcast and some of the folks that we've had on.
Yeah.
You mentioned Greg Kokel. I mentioned Paul Copan, but we've had on Jay Warner Wallace.
Frank Turek was just on.
Yeah, Frank. Mike Lacona, his work on the resurrection.
Sean McDowell was on a little while ago. Anyway.
So there's so many great resources. It's like, you don't want to be that guy.
No.
You don't want to be that girl, right? Who helped confirm your kid's disbelief.
Yeah.
And so, we don't. So at the same time, we don't blame the pastor completely. We don't want to throw him under the bus. We don't want to, I don't know, make parents too scared out there. But we want to appropriately motivate you. Like, parents, this is one of our tasks. And if you don't have the answers, that's okay. There's too many resources out there for you to remain ignorant on these things. So here's how Larry kind of closes up this first section, his deconversion, I guess, testimony. He says, in retrospect, I believe it hurt my belief very much to have been told that I should not ask so many questions. This is a terrible thing to say to a child, because he will infer, as I did, that only dogmatic people who lack curiosity and are unable to answer hard questions believe in God. Therefore, such a belief must be irrational. That's what I thought. And so that's the result of not welcoming in their questions and then not being able to help them to find resources.
Yeah, I like the word that he used about curiosity. And this is one thing I love about children and young people is their appetite for curiosity, that they have such curiosity. Now with technology, sometimes our children are so numbed to life that they stop asking questions because they're so addicted to technology. But naturally, we are made to be so curious. And so we might, as adults who get older and maybe just kind of get used to the rhythms of life, this is why having young people in your life is so important, because they'll ask questions that you haven't thought about for a long time and remind us that we need to stay curious, that if we want to be lifelong learners, that means we stay curious about life, about the things that people we care about. And this is one of those things that if young people are asking questions you've never thought of, be curious about that with them and just join them in the curiosity.
Yeah. And you know what? We will lose our best and our brightest.
Yeah.
Those curious minds if we don't equip them. But the flip side is we can retain our best and our brightest and equip them to have a significant impact for God. I mean, you think about Larry Sanger, he then walks away as a teenager and becomes a skeptic, and he loses 25, 30 years where he could be having an impact for Christ. And of course, God is sovereign in all this. But we know that we play a role in God's plans, and he uses us. And so Larry Sanger could have been used in a powerful way. And now look, very practically, if some parents out there going, all right, I don't even know where to start. And maybe they want to be more proactive, real simple. One of the ministries we think is a really great ministry for thoughtful Christianity, it would be William Lane Craig's ministry. Craig is a philosopher and apologist, but he's got a ministry called Reasonable Faith. And one thing that we recommend all the time is their YouTube video, or their YouTube videos. They have probably about 15 now. And you can simply go to YouTube, go to the search bar, type in Reasonable Faith animated videos, and you'll get a playlist of short, well done, non-cheesy, animated Christian videos that you can just start feeding to your kids. And you can start them in elementary school and then have them rewatch them and then show them again in middle school. And for your high schoolers, they're well done. That can be your starting point for just some basic apologetics. There's no shortage of resources out there.
Yeah, and I think just practically too, I would watch this with your kids. I'd watch this interview.
Larry Sanger's interview.
Yeah. And if you...
Or it's actually not an interview.
Or
it's just
the video.
him reading his testimony.
So I would watch it with the kids, because I would, especially if your kids aren't asking questions, or, it's, have them watch a video like that and say, hey, what would you could pause it, say, what would you say to a kid in your youth group if he asked this question?
Yeah.
Or what would you say to a friend, or have you ever wondered about this kind of thing?
And you might need to break it up, because he gets deep into some of his beliefs as a skeptic and as an agnostic, but it's very interesting because it's autobiographical.
Yeah.
So the point that we want to draw and just remind parents is always welcome your kids' questions. Affirm them in asking the questions, and then go do some homework to help them find answers. And when we do that, we won't disconfirm their belief. We will help to confirm their belief that Christianity is true. MAVEN exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. Through your generous financial partnership with MAVEN, you are having an impact on the lives of students and families across the country. To become a monthly partner, visit maventruth.com and click on the donate button.